What's the metaphor for forgiving college debt? It would be like someone who is addicted to heroin, who is going through horrendous withdrawals. And there's a certain person in the room who says, well, only thing we can do to do away with these withdrawals is give them another bump of heroin.
You just heard from a Fox News host who, of course, is coping hard with the fact that President Joe Biden today has announced that he will be forgiving a portion of student loan debt. And yes, it'll be means tested. Yes, there are limitations to the amount that will be forgiven. But nonetheless, one of the unexpected benefits of this news is that we get to watch wealthy people cry all over the corporate media. I know that was a Fox News clip, but believe me, it doesn't matter what you're watching, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, network news, all sorts of ridiculous arguments against the one really great thing that Biden has done, okay? And that is forgive student loan debt. I want to give you the details on how he is going to do it. Now, he first made the announcement via Twitter, where he wrote, "In keeping with my campaign promise, my administration is announcing a plan to give working and middle class families breathing room as they prepare to resume federal student loan payments in January of 2023. So that by itself is already a big announcement, because he is also noting that the repayments of student loans don't start back up until January of 2023. So with the new year, the payments will begin again. So that was a piece of news in and of itself. And in that tweet, he also included this graphic that says that some students will, or some student loan borrowers, I should say, can expect $20,000 to be forgiven if they went to college while receiving Pell Grants, okay? And you only qualify for Pell Grants if there's proof submitted that indicates that you come from a lower income family. So it's a little bit of government assistance, certainly not enough government assistance to prevent students from going into debt, but nonetheless, for students who did not need Pell Grants, they can still qualify for student loan forgiveness to the tune of $10,000, and it will be means tested, as that graphic had noted. So if you're making more than $125,000 a year, you will not qualify. But there are other pretty surprising goodies in this announcement, and we'll learn more details in the coming days. But the Department of Education will announce details on how borrowers can claim this relief. They have to apply for it, so it's not some automatic program. It would have been better if it was automatic. Sometimes there's a barrier for some people when it comes to the application process, but nonetheless, the department is also proposing a federal rule aimed at making the student loan system more manageable for current and future borrowers. So we'll learn some more details about that as well in coming days. But here's what we know detail-wise. The proposed rule would change income-based repayment for student loans, cutting in half the amount borrowers would have to pay each month on their undergraduate loans, while borrowers with both undergraduate and graduate loans will pay a weighted average rate. So the proposal would also, and I think this part's really important, okay? The proposal would also raise the amount of income that is considered non-discretionary income and therefore protected from repayment. And it would forgive loan balances after 10 years of payments rather than 20 years under many income-driven repayment plans for borrowers with original loan balances of $12,000 or less, the department said. So the $12,000 or less, that limitation is concerning, but I do like the fact that they have made the repayment program a lot easier for these students. The debt forgiveness after 10 years is good news as well. And the only concern I have about that is, as we saw with the Trump administration, if you have a more unfriendly pro-corporate administration in place, they might not honor the loan forgiveness program as the Biden administration envisions it. So there needs to be some safeguards in place to ensure that a Republican administration doesn't essentially go against this, because this is, at the end of the day, an executive order. He's doing this through executive action. This is not something that was done through Congress. And just like with the DACA program under Obama, you can have someone like Trump come in and essentially reverse the program through an executive order. Because again, if it's done through executive order, it's easier for an incoming administration to essentially reverse it. And I am concerned about that, but just something to keep in mind. It turns out that the amount forgiven in the student loans will not be considered taxable income. And that is so important. It's really, really good news. So Jeff Stein from Washington Post says, due to a provision that Chuck Schumer included in the American Rescue Plan last year, Biden's student debt forgiveness will not be counted as taxable income. That's really important because previously any debt that's forgiven will count as taxable income. And then you have to, pay a lot more in your taxes when you file. But because of this provision, which shockingly was included in the American Rescue Plan by Chuck Schumer, the amount forgiven will not be considered taxable income. So I wanted to make that clarification. That's actually really, really good news. Now, it's important to remember that while everyone is demanding more in student loan forgiveness, and I certainly would have loved to see that, to be fair to Biden, he was always honest about what he wanted to do on the campaign trail. So on the campaign trail, Biden called for immediately canceling a minimum of $10,000 in student loan debt per person as a response to the pandemic, as well as forgiving this he didn't do, as well as forgiving all undergraduate tuition-related federal student debt from 2- and 4-year public colleges and universities for those borrowers earning up to $125,000 a year. So what I would like to see moving forward is more than just a Band-Aid when it comes to the very real problem that we're seeing with higher education in this country. It's become incredibly unaffordable, unattainable. There are less young people even considering college today because they don't want to dig themselves into a massive hole of debt that they can't discharge in a bankruptcy. So I would really like to see more of a systemic solution that gives students a more affordable option. And a good way to do that is to go back to what we used to have in this country when we had free public colleges. Right? You want to pay for a private college? Do you, boo? That's up to you. But when it comes to public colleges and universities, I really do think they should be tuition free. We need to have a system in place where everyone, regardless of what their socioeconomic status is, has the ability to get a higher education. Because at the end of the day, we all know that someone with a college degree is very likely to earn more money through their career compared to an individual who did not get a college degree. So I want that opportunity to be afforded for everyone. And this is something that is going to provide some relief for now. But remember, we're already dealing with $1.4 trillion in federal student loan debt. So this is gonna cut that down a little bit. But in a few years, we'll be right back to where we were today, right? And so, or where we were before Biden decided to do a little bit of debt forgiveness. It doesn't solve the problem. It's a bit of a Band-Aid, to be honest. And I would like to see, again, a change in how this system works. So there is an option for people to go to college without having to take out any debt at all, or very little debt, if any. So this is also just kicking the can down the road. There is currently $1.6 trillion of outstanding federal student loan debt. The amount of outstanding debt would return to that level in just 4 years after $10,000 per borrower was canceled. And that's according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. And prior to the announcement, Biden had also forgiven tens of billions of dollars in student loans for students who had been defrauded from for-profit colleges. So those were the DeVry's, the ITT Techs, the Corinthians colleges. He has forgiven about $32 billion in federal student loans for students who had gone to these types of institutions. And while there are all sorts of Chicago School of Economics goons on the corporate press today crying about this, in reality, they're not concerned about, I don't think they're actually concerned about inflation. Like that's one of the top arguments they make. The other talking point is, well, what about all the people who paid their student loans? It's not fair to them. Look, if you happen to fall in that camp, if you manage to pay off your student loans, I hear you. I'm sure you worked really, really hard to do it, but you got through it. And right now there are a ton of people in this country who are struggling because of that unbearable debt looming over them, debt that they cannot discharge, debt that's holding them back from just doing basic things that older generations were able to do once they were adults. Things like buying homes, being able to have children. There are things that people want to do that they can't engage in because of the economic burden associated with insanely high tuition, which of course translates to insanely high student loan debt. And so, I mean, it's like the same reasoning as, oh, I have a family member who died of cancer. Why are we looking for a cure for cancer? My family member couldn't take advantage of it. Like, society progresses, we should be happy about that. And we should be happy that for once we have the government very modestly looking out for ordinary people as opposed to corporate interests. And so that's why I will give Biden some credit for this. I will also give him credit for the way he reacted during a press conference. That's a story that we'll do a little later, because he was asked by reporters whether this was the right move and whether this is gonna have an impact on inflation, and Biden had a shockingly good answer. Now, let's talk a little bit about why the corporate world wants to do absolutely nothing in relieving student loan debt. It's because the interest associated with paying back federal student loans is really a regressive tax. We have cut taxes on the rich, we have cut taxes on corporations, and the federal government is able to recoup some of those lost revenues through charging interest on federal student loans. And while it might be a little difficult to find the exact numbers, Slate actually did a pretty good job in looking for just how much the federal government makes from these federal student loan interest payments. So let's go to graphic 7 here. 70.3 billion is the amount the government collected on its loan portfolio in financial year 2019. That was the last full year before payments were paused due to the coronavirus pandemic. 32% of the total, or 22.4 billion, consisted of interest payments, okay? So they're getting some of their money back, meaning the principal plus the interest. So they're collecting $22.4 billion on student loan interest alone. Now, the federal government also uses this shady little trick used by big banks when it comes to mortgages, and I wanna talk about that. So student loans are structured to amortize like a mortgage, okay? With debtors mostly paying interest early on and principal later. So when you hear these stories about students who have been paying at least the minimum payment necessary on their student loans, and they've been doing it for years and years and years, and they notice that their amount continues to go up, it's because all they're really paying is the interest. That's it. The interest is front loaded, just like it is with a mortgage, right? Just like it is with a big bank or a credit union. They want to make sure they collect their interest before they allow you to pay down your principal. And the fact that the federal government is doing that with federal student loans is insane, but it gives you a sense of what the priority here is, right? They want to make sure they increase the federal government's revenue on the backs of people who just wanted to better their lives and get a decent higher education. So compare that to how the unelected, I should say, how the unelected Federal Reserve does things, right? Because if we're gonna do a comparison here, all right, let's help out the homies, let's help out the students who are struggling with student loan debt. And everyone's freaking out about the number because some analysis indicates that it would cost the federal government somewhere between 200 billion to $300 billion to do this whole program. Well, keep in mind that when the pandemic happened, the unelected Federal Reserve decided to pump money into corporations to keep them afloat. And when you compare the numbers here, it really tells you where the priorities have been for corporate media and for all the individuals who are now whining about students getting some relief. As the COVID-19 pandemic emerged in March of 2020, the Fed implemented an aggressive QE strategy, that's quantitative easing. It immediately injected more than $700 billion in asset purchases. In June of 2020, it implemented an ongoing QE program to purchase 120 billion of bonds per month, 80 billion in US Treasury securities and 40 billion in mortgage-backed securities. That program continued until the Fed started tapering its purchases in December of 2021. So when it comes to helping out corporations, when it comes to essentially buying assets, the Federal Reserve buying assets to keep these companies afloat, even to the tune of $700 billion in the very beginning of the pandemic, you really get a sense of what the commentary that we're hearing today is really about. I mean, there was no pushback about what the Fed had done with quantitative easing. So much pushback when it comes to, again, a mere 10 to 20,000 getting forgiven in student loan debt per student loan borrower, assuming they're making less than $125,000 a year. And I should also note that the media is being incredibly dishonest about how the general public feels about what Biden did today. For instance, if you go to CNBC, there's a headline that says 59% of Americans worry student loan forgiveness will make inflation worse. So you get the sense by seeing that headline that the majority of Americans are against this. And the article CNBC published was in regard to a poll that they had done with Momentive. And if you just go all the way down in that piece to get the poll results that are actually relevant, you'll find that the survey found that 30% of all adults say there should be no student loan forgiveness for anyone. So that's it. Just 30% of Americans are against it, meaning 80% of Americans are in favor of providing, 70% of Americans are in favor of providing student loan relief to these borrowers. Yet there are sharp divides, I should note, among those who hold the view. While 39% of men say no loan should be forgiven, just 22% of women agree with that statement. Only 19% of adults between 18 and 34 say no loans should be forgiven versus 39% over the age of 65. And those results aren't really that shocking when you consider that the people who are impacted the most by these insane tuition costs and the student loan debt are young people. They want to get a higher education, and the cost burden associated with it is just unbearable. So the results of that survey don't surprise me. And to be honest, the results of how the media is handling this also does not surprise me. But definitely dig deeper. Don't let them lie to you. It's about time the federal government does something to help average Americans with their own economic struggles.